And if I would just add, if doctors do read the papers, they just read the abstracts. And the abstracts say something very different oftentimes than the data that's even in the paper. I think the first article I read on the impact of the COVID vaccine on pregnancy said it was perfectly safe. But if you looked at the table that showed the data, what you saw is that the first the women who were given the vaccine in the first term of pregnancy had 87% miscarriages. But that's when you averaged those few subjects relative to the second and third trimester subjects, it wasn't statistically different. So, basically the abstract took the global picture of the vaccine and pregnancy rather than breaking it down in terms. And we all know that the first trimester is the critical one. So that abstract was totally fraudulent. So even if the doctors read the papers, if they're only reading the abstract, they could be getting a very different picture than what the data actually says, to the extent that the data is in that paper. And frankly, if I had reviewed that paper, and I've reviewed many papers for journals, I would not have let that abstract stand because it was very misleading. And that is not the only paper like that I've seen. So I try to read the entire paper because I find it's very different. And that's part of the problem as well.
So just very quickly, your books came out, at different times. Is this still the practice today, or have we changed? And since your book came out, Sickening, and since this stuff's been discussed, have they changed and now they do disclose, or is this exactly the same today as it always was?
It's the same with the data, and the problem's getting worse. I mean, Bob was talking about a new antipsychotic that's approved just a few days ago. This this drug to slow down Alzheimer's disease, Leqembi, was approved in January because it had a 27% reduction in the rate at which people with early Alzheimer's progressed. That 27% was 0.45 points on an 18-point scale, and the minimum meaningful improvement is 1.63 points. So the drug's approved because approved by the FDA because the improvement is statistically significant. The FDA approves the drug. The New England Journal of Medicine publishes the article without saying it's an insignificant improvement. And this drug is projected to be prescribed for 100,000 people in 3 years, which will cost the taxpayers $2.65 billion a year, but it could go way beyond that. So this is a drug with significant harms. 1 out of 5 patients has an adverse event, and 1 out of 37 patients has an adverse event that's serious enough to land them in the hospital. So no benefit, high cost, and serious adverse events. And this is what we call high-tech, cutting-edge, innovative biotech.
So that's an FDA approval process that's totally flawed as well. So
yes.
You have a problem with data production, you have this problem with data transparency, and then you have an approval process that'll look at some minor statistical significance on some scale and say, okay, we'll approve it, even though you have harms, you might have increased mortality, and it's clinically not noticeable. That's
exactly.
part of it.
This is the point you were making about the commercial design of the study. So the statisticians that work for the pharma companies can design a study based on this scale, and they know the amount of difference they need to get statistical significance, which is all the FDA is looking for and all the journals looking for. And they know how to design that study to get a statistically significant and clinically meaningless result, and then do the marketing that creates the imperative to prescribe it.
Well, even when the data shows there's harm, as there was in the Vioxx studies, as we were talking earlier, when the person who analyzed that data looked at it, he went to his boss and said, hey, this can't be approved because it causes heart attacks. And his boss said, well, the pharmaceutical industry is our client. And the reason is because of the 1992 Prescription Drug User Fee Act, which now supplies, last I heard, about 72% or so of the salaries of the people of the part of the FDA that approves drugs. So now we have this clear conflict of interest, which, if I sat on an IRB and I saw this kind of conflict of interest, I wouldn't allow the study to go forward, right? That would be unethical. But yet we have this setup where we have unethical conflicts of interest, and not just between the FDA and the drug companies, but also in many cases between the people who are doing the studies. And they have the people who are on the FDA advisory boards even that have conflicts of interest. So the whole system has gotten to be extremely corrupt. And that's part of what happens when you have, basically an approval system that is so authoritarian that it can't be challenged in court. And that's one of the things that happened after the 1962 amendments. The drug companies cannot sue the FDA if the FDA is being corrupt in some way, like letting one company's studies and one company's drug go forward while it holds back another one. There is no recourse. So it's a very corrupt system. It's been set up that way, and it shouldn't surprise us that this is the result.